up all the hottest pie tips for single and double crust pies. Oh! Welcome to this episode of Happy Baking. In this episode, I want to take you to pie school. We are going to learn everything you need to know about how to roll out a crust, how to line a pie plate, and prepare the edges for crimping. It's going to give you some of your prettiest pies yet. This process is slightly different for single crust and double crust pies, and I'm going to break down how to do both. You can find my favorite all but a pie dough in the video description below in case you want to bake along with me. Now let's get baking. First, let's tackle rolling out the dough. The first thing you're going to want to do is lightly dust your work surface with flour. I usually use 1 handful of flour, and I usually don't have to use that much more as I work. I can kind of keep just using that same initial amount of flour on the work surface. Begin to roll out the dough by placing your pin in the center and then pushing it away from you. Then bring it back to the center and bring it towards you. This is going to feel a little awkward at first, but it's a good way to ensure that you're applying even pressure, which is going to get you that nice, even thickness. As it gets a little bit easier, you can start to do the motion a little bit faster. Rotate the dough frequently as you work. You can even flip it over. This is a great way to ensure that it's not getting stuck anywhere without having to use more flour. It also allows you to help feel the thickness throughout the dough as you're working, to make sure you don't have one side that's a little bit thicker and one part that's getting a little too thin. As the dough starts to get bigger, you can actually use the rolling pin to help you move it around your work surface. Just place the rolling pin on one end and wrap the dough around it. Then unfurl the dough into a different section of the work surface. Rather than focusing on the diameter of the dough, I really encourage you to think about the thickness instead. We're aiming between 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch, which is 3 to 6 millimeters. You can use your pie pan as a guide to make sure that you've got the right size as you roll. Place it upside down in the center of the dough. You're aiming for about 2 inches or 5 centimeters of excess all around the outside edge. Pie-fict. Next up, let's talk about lining the pie plate. I like to use the rolling pin to transfer the dough to the pie plate. Place the rolling pin on one end of the dough and start to wrap it around the pin. Then place one of the loose ends of the dough on one edge of the pie plate and gently unfurl it by unwrapping it from around the pin. Then you'll just need to gently lift it up at the edges and press it down to make sure it's coming in contact with the sides and base of the pie plate. Trim away the excess dough with scissors. We're aiming to have about a 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter of excess hanging off the very edge of the pie plate. And don't forget to save your pie scraps. They keep in the fridge for up to 2 days, in the freezer for up to 3 months, and there's tons of ideas for things you can do with them inside the book on pie. If you want to hear some more, maybe tell us in the comments and we'll make a video about it too. Let's talk about how I like to prepare the edge of the crust for my pies. My technique for preparing a pie edge includes a little bit of extra thickness on the outside edge. We do that by folding some of the dough under itself. This extra thickness gives you a little bit of extra mass, which makes it easier to crimp, and it helps the crimps stay better during baking. But it also gives you a little bit of that extra flaky crust at the edge, which I think is particularly great when you're eating it too. The technique is basically the same, but there are some slight differences whether you're making a single crust or double crust pie. For single crust pies, what you're going to want to do is tuck the excess dough that you have around that outside edge under itself. The goal is to make it pretty flush with the edge of the pie plate, but fully tucking it under. Then you'll press it lightly with your fingers all the way around just to help seal it a little bit. The crust can be left like this. I call that actually a straight edge, and it bakes up really flaky and lovely just like that, or it can be crimped or finished however you like. Here's what you do for a double crust pie. You're going to want to prepare the bottom crust just like you did for the single crust pie, trimming away and leaving about a 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter of excess all around the edge. Then you're going to add your filling to the bottom crust. You can toss that bottom crust filled up into the fridge while you get your top crust ready. Roll out your top crust and then use the rolling pin to gently transfer it to the top of the pie. Next, you'll want to firmly pinch the top crust and bottom crust together all the way around the outside edge. The goal is both to press them together to help them adhere to one another and seal them a little bit, but we also want to focus on making that dough a little bit thinner so that we don't end up with a really, really thick edge. After you've pinched really well, we're going to use scissors to trim the excess dough again aiming for about 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter of excess all the way around the outside edge. Then we'll tuck the crust under itself the same way I direct for a single crust pie, but in this case, the top crust is kind of getting tucked under the bottom crust. This really helps to seal it well as giving you that nice chubby edge for crimping. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode where we learned how to roll out dough and line pie plates for single and double crust pies. You can find more pie tips like these inside my best-selling cookbook, The Book on Pie, available wherever books are sold. If this episode inspires you to make a pie, be sure to let us know in the comments. I love to know what you're making in your own kitchens. And do me a favor, like this video and be sure to click subscribe so you can receive alerts for all of our new episodes as they become available. So until next time, wishing you lots of happy baking.